Rohan Deshmukh stepped off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport, his backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, eyes scanning the crowd with a mix of excitement and calculation. Beside him, Tanvi Mehra clutched her passport and camera, chatting animatedly about all the places she wanted to photograph, while Aarav Kapoor trailed slightly behind, scrolling on his phone, seemingly oblivious to the energy around him. They were a group of young Indian tourists on their first European adventure. Yet there was something in the way Rohan moved that set him apart from ordinary travelers, a sharpness in his gaze, a precision in his gestures, as if he were observing not only the sights but also the people, looking for something hidden. Their first stop was the iconic streets of Paris, winding through cafes, cobblestone lanes, and the sprawling gardens of Tuileries. On the surface, they appeared normal, laughing at each other's selfies, sampling pastries and jotting down notes in a small guidebook. But subtle incidents began to draw attention almost immediately. Locals noticed that Tanvi had a habit of cutting lines at crowded cafes, shrugging off murmurs of annoyance with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Aarav, usually quiet, seemed increasingly impatient in stores, often brushing past vendors and knocking over displays. Meanwhile, Rohan lingered in the shadows, occasionally glancing around as if noting every security camera, every blind spot in the streets, every person who might watch or interfere with whatever he was planning at first. The complaints were minor shopkeepers mentioning lost items, other tourists complaining about coup jumping. But there was a pattern emerging. Rohan had a strange fascination with unattended objects. He was seen hovering near museum benches, pockets subtly bulging after brief moments with wallets, phones, and loose change that seemed to vanish. No one could prove it at the time, but whispers started to circulate among local guides and hotel staff. By the second day, the trio had already begun to acquire a reputation. In the evenings, the group stayed at a small boutique hotel near Montmartre, where the staff began noticing something even stranger. Packages meant for other guests went missing, and valuables left in rooms were reported gone or tampered with. Rohan was never seen leaving the hotel late at night. Yet security footage often showed subtle, fleeting shadows, sometimes his, sometimes indistinguishable from others. Tanvi and Aarav seemed unaware of what was happening, often laughing in the lobby or exploring nearby streets. But Rohan was meticulous, precise, almost obsessive in his movements, always ensuring that no one could trace him directly to the incidents. As the week progressed, tension built not just in the hotel but across the city. Local cafes, souvenir shops, and small galleries began sharing notes about the unusual trio. A barista at a small bistro noticed Tanvi pretending to pay for a pastry, only for the cash to disappear before the register beeped. Aarav's fingerprints were unknowingly left on a display case, while Rohan quietly observed staff reactions, almost studying human behavior. These minor infractions, though small, started to feel like the threads of something larger, an invisible hand-weaving chaos. Quietly and effectively, tour guides became uneasy in their presence. Rohan seemed interested in more than sightseeing. He lingered near restricted areas, noting cameras and exits, while Tanvi distracted employees with questions and Aarav fumbled with maps and directions in ways that seemed intentional. Each small misdeed, when combined, created a growing aura of disruption that no one could quite explain. Yet no one dared confront them directly. There was something in Rohan's demeanor that made even seasoned locals wary. A subtle threat masked by casual charm. By the end of the week, social media posts started appearing, tagging the trio as chaotic tourists, and the local community murmured in frustration and fear. Even other tourists began noticing the pattern. Things went missing, small incidents escalated, and yet the trio always seemed untouchable, slipping through every potential trap. Rohan Deshmukh's fascination with surveillance and human behavior, combined with Tanvi's charm and Aarav's obliviousness, created a strange, dangerous synergy. What had started as a typical sightseeing trip was, slowly, turning into a string of unexplained mishaps that left locals uneasy and visitors whispering about a trio that seemed to bring trouble wherever they went. By the time they visited the Eiffel Tower, no one could ignore it. Lines were disrupted, minor thefts reported. The presence of the trio became a cause of tension among staff and tourists alike. It was clear that beneath the laughter, the photos, and the apparent naivety, something much darker was unfolding, something that would soon escalate far beyond petty annoyances. The arrival of Rohan Deshmukh and his companions had marked the beginning of a chain of events that would mystify, terrify, and ultimately anger locals and travelers across Europe, setting the stage for a story no one could have predicted. The night in Paris carried a chill that seemed to seep into the bones of anyone walking along the Seine. Tanvi Mehra, full of energy earlier in the evening, decided to take a solo stroll while Rohan Deshmukh and Aarav Kapoor lingered back at their hotel. It was a narrow, lantern-lit street, the kind often romanticized in postcards. But under the soft glow of the lamps, a sense of unease quietly grew. Tanvi had a habit of wandering, easily distracted by street performers, small art stalls, and the reflection of the city lights in the water. But this time, she never returned. When Rohan finally noticed her absence, he feigned mild concern, suggesting to Aarav that she had gone to a nearby cafe. Aarav, preoccupied with his phone, barely registered the tension. Hotel staff initially assumed she had returned and gone to bed. Tanvi was gone. The police were notified, yet the first shock came when investigators reviewed the CCTV footage. The cameras covering the streets she walked vanished at the exact moments she would have been visible. It was as if the city itself had swallowed her. Detective Isabelle Fontaine, known for her sharp instincts and persistence, took the case personally. She noticed irregularities in the hotel logs, key cards swiped but not used, elevators stopping at odd floors, and access to areas that no ordinary guest would reach. Rohan Deshmukh's behavior became increasingly erratic. He insisted she had merely wandered off but was seen pacing the lobby, occasionally glancing at the stairwells and exits, as though calculating something invisible. Aarav Kapoor continued to play the role of oblivious companion, unaware of the gravity or perhaps pretending to be Dot as Isabelle dug deeper. She began uncovering a pattern that went beyond Paris. Incidents in London, Berlin, and Rome involving missing items. Petty vandalism and even unexplained disappearances bore the subtle mark of Rohan's presence. Each time he was not the direct suspect, but his proximity to chaos was undeniable. Locals began sharing stories online, creating a mosaic of fear and irritation. It became more than just a missing tourist. It was a growing legend of a man who appeared wherever trouble unfolded. Meanwhile, the atmosphere around the remaining duo intensified. Without Tanvi, Rohan's calculated charm twisted into something darker. He was careful, measured, but his eyes constantly searched for observers. And his hands, once casual, now fidgeted with hidden pockets, buttons, and devices. Aarav, though uneasy, remained in the background, providing cover for Rohan's unpredictable maneuvers. Authorities grew suspicious not just of the disappearance, but of the dynamics of the group itself. Every minor inconsistency became evidence pointing to something much larger. The media picked up the story quickly. Sensational headlines questioned the safety of tourists and sparked outrage among locals, who were frustrated by repeated incidents that seemed to target the very fabric of city life. Online forums speculated about the chaotic trio, painting Rohan as the mastermind, Tanvi as the victim, and Aarav as the unwitting accomplice. Public perception began shifting from annoyance to fear. Tour guides whispered to each other about the uncanny way the trio managed to remain under the radar until something broke, leaving chaos in their wake. By midweek, the investigation revealed that Rohan Deshmukh had traveled under multiple identities. Airline records, hotel reservations, and online profiles all painted a fragmented picture. He had arrived in Europe with no visa violations, no prior criminal record in the countries visited. Yet his fingerprints and presence were indirectly linked to incidents across multiple cities. Each disappearance, theft, or altercation formed a pattern too precise to be accidental. Even Tanvi's vanishing could no longer be seen as random. It fits seamlessly into a growing trail of mysterious events. The turning point came when Isabelle discovered a hidden folder on Rohan's laptop, filled with photos, notes, and maps of European cities. They were meticulously labeled with dates, locations, and people of interest. It was a digital blueprint of disruption, showing not only where chaos had occurred, but also where it might happen next. At that moment, investigation moved beyond searching for a missing tourist, became a hunt for a man capable of manipulating perception, exploiting vulnerabilities, and leaving fear in his wake by the time Paris settled into a quiet dawn. Tanvi Mehra was still missing. Rohan Deshmukh had slipped through every immediate grasp, and Aarav Kapoor remained a baffling, passive presence. The city began to understand that this was not a simple case of a lost traveler. A calculated mind was at work, and Europe had only glimpsed the beginning. Somewhere in the shadows, Rohan was already planning his next move. And no one could predict where the trail of chaos would lead. Detective Isabelle Fontaine leaned back in her office chair, staring at the wall covered with photographs, maps, and timelines. The truth about Rohan Deshmukh was beginning to crystallize, though each revelation seemed more unsettling than the last. What initially appeared as a series of petty misbehaviors and accidental mishaps was, in fact, a meticulously orchestrated web of deception. Rohan was no ordinary tourist. He had a hidden identity and a skill for manipulating both people and perception records. Revealed that Rohan Deshmukh was not his real name. He was born Rohit Sharma, a man with a criminal past in India involving fraud, smuggling, and small-time scams that had escalated over time. He had fled India years ago, disappearing into a network of false identities, using stolen passports and forged visas to move freely across Europe. Unlike typical criminals, Rohit did not leave obvious traces. He preferred subtlety, working behind the scenes to orchestrate incidents that made him appear as a mere tourist. His genius lay in creating chaos while maintaining the illusion of innocence. Even more chilling was his manipulation of his companions. Tanvi Mehra and Aarav Kapoor had no criminal history and appeared genuinely oblivious to Rawat's schemes. Yet, in their presence, he created confusion and distraction. Tanvi unknowingly became a focal point for attention, while Aarav's careless movements allowed Rohit to execute his plans with minimal interference. In interviews with staff, locals repeatedly described the trio as a confusing mix of charm and unpredictability. And only now did it become clear why. Each minor act, the line cutting, the unattended cameras, the petty thefts was carefully designed to feed a narrative of misbehavior while hiding a larger, more calculated agenda. Digital forensics revealed that Rohit Sharma had been using social media as a weapon. He created dozens of fake profiles to amplify incidents, ensuring that each complaint or mishap went viral. Locals' frustrations were magnified online, often portraying Indian tourists as careless, disrespectful, or even dangerous. The chaotic tourist image that had grown in Paris was not a coincidence. It was a carefully manipulated illusion. What began as minor annoyances became a full-blown media spectacle, feeding both anger and fear. As Isabelle dug deeper, she uncovered evidence that Rohit's manipulations were not limited to perception alone. Hidden among his digital files were blueprints of hotel layouts, security camera maps, and local emergency routes. Every European city he visited had been studied in advance. He knew where police patrols were weakest, which streets were poorly monitored, and which areas would generate the most attention for minor disruptions. His crimes were strategic. A missing wallet here, a disrupted line there, all creating ripples of chaos. It's designed to elevate his profile in the digital world while keeping authorities off balance. Even Tanvi Mehra's disappearance, initially thought to be an accident or random event, now appeared deliberate. CCTV footage previously missing at key moments was not just a coincidence. It had been erased remotely, likely by Rohit himself. He understood how to exploit technology to control narratives, ensuring that any investigation would follow false trails. The chilling realization was that his crimes were layered, They existed in the real world and the digital one simultaneously, blurring the line between actual misbehavior and manufactured outrage. While many Europeans began judging tourists collectively, labeling them as careless or rude, Isabelle understood the deeper danger. One man's cunning could shape the perception of millions. Rohit Sharma had weaponized stereotypes, turning everyday minor annoyances into a global phenomenon of resentment. He had successfully convinced the world that Indian tourists were chaotic and disruptive, when in reality it was the calculated actions of a single, brilliant manipulator. By the end of her investigation, Isabelle Fontaine faced a daunting task. Rohit Sharma was no longer just a missing person case or petty theft suspect. He had become a symbol of how perception could be twisted, how one mind could turn ordinary travelers into villains in the public eye. Every incident in Paris, London, Berlin, and Rome suddenly took on new significance. Each minor complaint was part of a meticulously plotted strategy designed to inflame tensions, sow fear, and create a story that the world would believe without question. The revelation was horrifying. The chaos spreading across Europe, the frustration with Indian tourists, and the growing resentment online were not the result of ordinary travel mishaps. They were the consequences of Rohit Sharma's genius, a criminal mind that thrived on deception, manipulation, and the exploitation of human bias. And somewhere, likely already planning his next move, he remained free, untouchable, and always one step ahead of those who sought to stop him. By the time summer settled over the Italian coast, Isabelle Fontaine had pieced together enough evidence to locate Rohit Sharma. The trail was faint, marked by digital footprints and subtle patterns only someone with a keen eye could detect. Surveillance footage from ports, airports, and hotel lobbies revealed fleeting glimpses of Rohit, always cautious, always observant, never leaving enough evidence to link him directly to crimes until now. He had been careful for years, but even the most meticulous plans leave traces. The key was finding them before he disappeared again. The coastal town where he had been spotted was a sleepy village with narrow alleyways, old stone buildings, and a quiet harbor. Rohit blended perfectly into the scenery, his appearance carefully altered with hats, glasses, and subtle changes to his clothing style. Locals noticed nothing unusual. To them, he was just another tourist, walking leisurely along the waterfront. But Isabelle and her team had learned to see the patterns beneath the ordinary. The timing of shipments, the movement of vehicles, and even the positions of shadows in security cameras formed a map that led straight to him. Inside a small, rented apartment overlooking the harbor, Rohit worked tirelessly. He had accumulated a collection of stolen artifacts, documents, and high-tech equipment, all hidden beneath loose floorboards and false walls. Maps with escape routes, lists of corruptible local officials, and blueprints of surrounding buildings lay spread across his table. Every detail, every possibility had been considered. He was preparing for a final act, a disappearance that would both frustrate authorities and create another wave of international outrage, reinforcing his fabricated narrative of chaotic tourists. The authorities moved carefully. Isabelle knew that a hasty raid could allow Rohit to vanish, possibly taking critical evidence with him. Coordination with local police was meticulous, combining surveillance, stakeouts, and careful timing. The team observed him for days, noting routines, entrances, and exits, all while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Every day, Rohit left the apartment, seemingly to stroll along the harbor or buy groceries. Yet Isabelle suspected he was testing security measures, gauging response times, and refining his own contingency plans. The night of the raid arrived with tension thick in the air. Rohit, unaware that he was cornered, was preparing to execute his plan, which involved slipping onto a cargo ship bound for another country and vanishing from European authorities entirely. His final preparations included erasing digital footprints, masking fingerprints, and setting traps designed to delay anyone following him. But Isabelle's team was ready, anticipating every move. The streets were quiet, the harbor nearly deserted, and the only sound was the distant lapping of water against the docked boats. As Rohit stepped into the shadows of the port, a precise team of officers moved in silently. He noticed to light the escape route he had meticulously planned was blocked. Panic flickered across his face, an emotion rarely seen in the man who had orchestrated chaos across continents. He tried to run, weaving between containers, climbing over crates, but Isabelle and the officers were faster. Every twist, every narrow alley he had memorized, now became a trap. Finally, cornered against a shipping container, Rohit Sharma was captured, his hands cuffed as the reality of failure settled over him. Inside the apartment, investigators found the full extent of his operations. Stolen artifacts from museums and private collections, forged passports, detailed notes on future plans, and devices designed to hack hotel security systems were all evidence of a mind obsessed with control and manipulation. Every disappearance, every minor theft, every viral incident had been calculated. The chilling realization hit that he had not only committed crimes but had engineered a global narrative to make the world mistrust an entire nationality. Despite the successful capture, public outrage lingered. Europeans had already internalized the image of the chaotic tourist, and the story of Rohit Sharma's manipulations only partially explained the widespread frustration. Tourists now face stricter scrutiny at airports, increased suspicion in hotels, and judgmental stares in public spaces. Isabelle Fontaine understood that the criminal was behind bars, but the perception he had engineered could not be arrested. It had taken root, spreading far beyond his own actions. Rohit Sharma awaited trial, his calculated plans dismantled, but his impact permanent. For Tanvi, Mehra, and Aarav Kapoor, who had been caught up unwittingly in his schemes, life returned slowly to normal, though the trauma lingered. Yet for the rest of the world, a single man had managed to shape opinion, manipulate stereotypes, and instill fear while hiding behind the guise of an ordinary tourist. The capture was a victory, but the story was far from over. Somewhere, the ripple effect of his actions continued, and the consequences for innocent travelers endured. A chilling reminder of how perception could be weaponized by one cunning mind. The trial of Rohit Sharma was the spectacle that Europe had been waiting for. Courtrooms were crowded, news outlets broadcasted every detail, and online forums buzzed with speculation. The man who had manipulated perception, orchestrated chaos, and vanished into the shadows of multiple cities was finally in the spotlight, forced to confront the consequences of his actions. Yet even in chains, Rohit exuded a calm that unsettled everyone. His eyes scanned the room with the same calculating precision he had used to disrupt entire communities, as if the court itself were another chessboard for him to navigate. For Detective Isabelle Fontaine, the trial was a relief, but also a moment of reflection. She had uncovered the intricate web of Rohit Sharma's manipulations, tracked his movements across borders, and finally brought him to justice. But the wider implications worried her. The narrative he had spun, that Indian tourists were chaotic and inconsiderate, had already taken root in public perception. Social media campaigns, viral videos, and online discussions had amplified the stereotype, often ignoring the fact that it was the work of a single criminal mind. The world had been convinced that this was the norm, not the exception. And undoing that misconception would be far more difficult than catching Rohit Aarav Kapoor and Tanvi Mehra. Once unwitting participants in Rohit's schemes struggled to reclaim their lives. Aarav's quiet nature had made him almost invisible during the chaos, but he carried the weight of guilt and confusion. Tanvi returned home with lingering questions and a haunting sense of vulnerability, aware that she had narrowly escaped becoming another statistic in a criminal's plan. Both knew that the world had already judged them unfairly, associating their nationality with the incidents they had been dragged into. The trial itself revealed shocking details: evidence of stolen artifacts, falsified identities, hacked digital systems, and meticulously planned disruptions demonstrated Rohit Sharma's criminal genius. Witnesses testified about minor incidents that, when combined, painted a picture of methodical manipulation designed to maximize attention and outrage. Even minor inconveniences like line cutting or small thefts were shown to be part of a calculated strategy. Each story added a layer to the narrative, revealing the depth of his obsession with control, perception, and chaos. Public reaction, however, remained mixed. While many celebrated the capture of Rohit Sharma, the fear and mistrust he had sown persisted. Travelers were scrutinized more harshly in airports. Hotel staff treated visitors with suspicion, and social media continued to echo stereotypes. In some ways, Rohit had one even while behind bars. His strategy had extended beyond the immediate crime to alter the perception of an entire group. The consequences of one man's obsession reached far beyond the courtroom, reminding the world how vulnerable public opinion can be to manipulation. Inside prison, Rohit Sharma maintained his composure. He spent hours studying legal documents, planning appeals, and refining his understanding of human behavior. Even confined, he seemed undeterred, already calculating how to turn his imprisonment into another narrative, ensuring that attention remained on him. For him, the chaos he created was more than a game, was a demonstration of power over perception, a way to manipulate reality without ever touching the law directly until his capture. Meanwhile, Detective Isabelle Fontaine focused on educating the public about the truth. She appeared on interviews, wrote articles, and collaborated with tourism boards to dismantle the stereotypes Rohit had created. She emphasized that the actions of one individual should never define an entire nationality. And she urged travelers and locals alike to be vigilant yet fair. Slowly, awareness began to grow. But the shadow of Rohit Sharma's crimes lingered by the end of the year. The world had begun to heal, though the memory of the chaotic tourists lingered in whispered warnings and cautious glances. Rohit Sharma's case became a cautionary tale about how one person could manipulate perception, weaponize bias, and change behavior without ever directly confronting a single stereotype except through calculated deception. His capture was a victory of justice, but the lingering fear and mistrust were reminders that human perception is fragile, easily swayed, and often unfairly generalized on in the quiet aftermath. Tanvi and Aarav resumed their lives with caution, wary of public judgment but determined not to be defined by it. Detective Isabelle Fontaine returned to her work, knowing that the battle against perception and prejudice was ongoing, that justice sometimes addressed actions but rarely perceptions. And somewhere in a prison cell far from the streets of Europe, Rohit Sharma sat with a calm smile, already imagining the next move in a world that had once underestimated the power of one cunning mind.